morning. I'm Dennis Shaw, and it's my pleasure to serve as this morning's worship associate. This is the first in-person worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Charlotte County since March 2020. It's so wonderful to stand here at this historic pulpit. It's wonderful to stand here at this historic reconditioned pulpit. And it's so wonderful to look about the sanctuary and see the beautiful work that's been done in here or throughout the whole building. This service is being broadcast live via YouTube. Unfortunately, there are predators, trolls that work on the internet who look for personal information and then use it to attack folks. So we have to be careful. So the Communications Committee has asked us to use first names only. But in the exception, if I'm in the future or other worship associates would like to use your name during a service, they'll ask you beforehand if they can use your last name. Since we're still coping with COVID-19, we need to comply with a few simple instructions. These instructions were developed by the Reopening Committee, and their members include Laurie and Joe and Linar and Linda and Catherine. Now, the first rule I want to share has nothing to do with the pandemic. Turn off your phones. Now, while you're in the building, please wear your masks, unless you're the worship associate. And I feel like Biden going to the lectern. You sit in a designated chair. Chairs with colored push pins, they need to remain vacant. This is very interesting. We're eliminating the women's and men's bathroom designations. This means that now we have 2 bathrooms, which should make the women very happy. You can use either bathroom that is free. However, we want to limit occupancy to 1 individual or family unit at a time. So right by the water cooler, there are these sliders that say vacant, and if it's vacant, you go in. Then you come out, you must remember to put, when you go in, you're going to put occupied. And then when you come out, it's no longer occupied, so go back to vacant. If you have a particular desire for a urinal, there is a picture on one of the little sliders of a urinal. So let's see. Oh, the other thing is that we wanted to be sure to provide adequate social distancing. So please don't wait in that little hallway between the kitchen and the bathrooms. That's a little too close. We will enter through the main doors, as we already have. And at the end of the service, we're going to exit out this door over here. Please do not sing, although I plan to quietly hum during Spirit of Life and Go Now in Peace. Enjoy this morning's special piano music, which is provided by our Director of Music, Jim Boyle. I wish to express my gratitude to Jackie, UUFCC's Connections Coordinator, to Corey, our computer wizard, and members of the UUFCC Board of Trustees who are serving as our greeters and ushers. Also, I want to recognize the folks that have been really busy organizing, decorating, and preparing our building for this reopening. They include the very, very talented and brilliant Laura L. and Don L., Tom D., and me. Now, in the future, if you're new to the fellowship, we're asking that you fill out a form. The folks at the front desk will have it, and just give us your name and where you're from and anything you want us to know about you. And then the usher will give it to the worship associate, and he or she will then introduce first timers to the rest of us. I don't see any first timers today. There are, okay. Could you please stand and yell out your first name through your masks?
I'm Bree. This is my son Ray and my husband Dan.
Welcome. Oh, yes. I also need to be sure that I mention, oh, we have more. Please stand. Now just call out your name.
Phil Kramer.
I made a error in my script here and did not acknowledge Corey as one of the folks that helped us get ready. And please call out your name.
My name's Bryce.
Welcome. Yes, I'm sorry I didn't recognize you as new folks. I guess it's the masks. Our speaker this morning is Dr. Sharon Whitehill. And I asked her to send me some information so I could formally introduce her. And she did, and she put it in first person, and that's how I'm going to read it. I've been coming to UUFCC since the mid-90s, first as a snowbird, soon as a member, and then full-time when we moved here in 2013, and all the changes I've seen. I've met almost all of my current friends here. My husband, Jim, and I became permanent residents when I retired and realized I had more connections in Florida than when we left Grand Haven, Michigan. I grew up in Milwaukee, but except for 3 years of getting my PhD at the University of Illinois, I spent all of my adult life in Southwest Michigan. As you may have gathered from my introduction of Reverend Bruce Bode a few weeks ago, for my 32 years as an English professor at Grand Valley State University, I taught everything from Shakespeare to mythology to Greek literature, and of course, writing. The delight when I retired was to be able to do my own writing instead of critiquing and grading students' papers, which English teachers all know is the downside of talking about literature they love. And now that we're reopening, however slowly, I hope Jim and I can begin our class, Happiness is an Inside Job, again one day soon. Sharon, I am so excited that you're our speaker this morning. Our opening words this morning are thoughts on forgiveness that were selected by Sharon. The first is from Nelson Mandela. As I walk out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew that if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison. From Mahatma Gandhi, the weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is an attribute of the strong. From Oprah Winfrey, forgiveness is giving up the hope that the past could have been any different. And finally, from Oscar Wilde, always forgive your enemies. Nothing annoys them so much. And now we will have a piano prelude. It is entitled, "It Is Well With My Soul" by Philip Bliss, and it was arranged by Fred Bach. This morning's chalice lighting words are by Christine Robinson. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys, sorrows, gifts, and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life that we share. And now Laurie will light the chalice. The chalice has symbolically been filled with fresh oil. It has a new wick. Now please join me in our recitation of our affirmation. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our aspiration, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another. The next segment of our worship will include entries to the Book of Life, and then Jim will again play for us. It's a piano meditation. Following Jim's music, we'll have silent meditation. And then Jim will bring us back by playing Spirit of Life. We have a long tradition at UUFCC of sharing our joys and sorrows, life milestones, by entering them into a book of life. Because of the pandemic, we have modified this tradition. You may email your joys, sorrows, and personal milestones to worshipassociates@uufcc.org. Messages should be sent no later than Saturday prior to the service. You can also fill out a form beginning next week as you come in to the lobby. You can get it from a greeter. And then that greeter will give the message to the worship associate. So now I will share the joys and sorrows and milestones that I have received. Again, after I've completed reading, Jim will play a meditative song in this very room by Ron and Carol Harris, arranged by Fred Bach. And after Jim is finished, we will maintain a time of silence. Then Jim will call us back from our silence by playing our traditional hymn, Spirit of Life. I have 2 entries for the Book of Life this morning. Please send out your prayers and positive energy for our dear Helen Solkowski, as she's going to have a total knee replacement. And this is from Laura A. Please send healing and kind thoughts to our daughter, Sherry, and grandson, Jack, who have COVID for the 2nd time. Also to our son-in-law, Pete, who continues to be plagued with lingering health problems related to his COVID exposure in December.
You do not know how happy I am to be here. I feel like I've come home. So greetings to all of you. I'd like you to take a minute to think about the times in your life, in your past, when somebody really hurt you. How do you feel about that experience now? Maybe the memory still twists at your heart? Or maybe you see the whole thing differently now that some time has gone by. Maybe you realize the person involved wasn't as selfish or heartless as you once thought. Or maybe you don't think about that person much at all anymore. Some years ago here, I spoke of forgiveness, but when it came to illustrating my points, I mostly relied on well-known examples and instances. So I spoke about Polish officials asking forgiveness of the Jews. I spoke of the survivors of genocide in Rwanda meeting face-to-face with the killers, and about South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Those were powerful stories, but from so far away that they required an imaginative leap to identify with. What I'll be talking about this morning is much closer to home. I want to begin with some facts from that earlier sermon, but then I'll move on to forgiveness as it pertains to the issues even now on all of our minds, especially those of us in this congregation. First of all, let me make clear what I mean by forgiveness. I define it as the willingness and ability to free ourselves of resentments and vengeful thoughts toward those who've hurt us and or who have had a major negative impact on our lives. A willingness and ability to free ourselves of resentment toward those we see as the cause of our pain. Of course, practicing this is a fresh challenge each time we're asking ourselves to do so. But the concept is ancient as the hearts of the first human beings who walked the earth. Forgiveness was so important to them that they wrote it into their faith texts, and they ritualized it in the form of confession, penances, meditations, and prayers. They expressed it in the Golden Rule, versions of which can be found ancient places like Egypt, Babylonia, Greece, India, and Judea. Pardon those who have done you wrong, said Zoroaster in Persia. Forgive injuries, forgive your enemy, be reconciled to him, give him assistance, said Confucius in China. Forgiveness also became the ethical basis for social and legal reform, justice tempered by mercy. And today, forgiveness of others and of ourselves remains the foundation of therapy, as Ted Zawistowski explained it in his recent talk. Well, that definition might make it sound easy, but we know from experience that it's anything but. Think of those 5 little Amish girls killed at school, where the entire community not only forgave the killer, but one man, one father, physically embraced the killer's father and held him while they both wept. Think of another father, a Muslim, whose only son was shot and killed by a 14-year-old gang member while he was delivering pizzas. When this father chose to forgive, it changed everyone's life. He formed a powerful friendship with the killer's grandfather, and later with the reformed teenager himself. the two older men developed a program to help urban children at risk. Conflict will never go away, they say, but from conflict, brotherhood and unity are possible. Now, these are certainly extreme examples, but they're not as uncommon as you might think. Nor do they mean that when you forgive, your suffering is magically erased. The people involved may have lifted themselves out of their anger and bitterness, but they did not walk away from the prison of grief. One thing I can tell you is that real forgiveness is good for your mental and physical health. Hundreds of studies show what forgiveness does for you psychologically, neurologically, and physiologically. It lowers the effects of anxiety, depression, chronic pain, stress, and hostility. It lowers your chance of alcohol and substance abuse. It lowers your blood pressure, your heart rate, your sweat activity. It even lowers the tension in your frown muscles. Now, those same studies show that you pay a steep price for holding on to resentment and anger. Harboring those kinds of feelings makes you more likely to have marital problems, family problems, friendship problems. I like the way one doctor put it. He said, hatred is a banquet until you realize that you are the main course. So forgiveness is good for us, fine. But is it always better to forgive? Are some behaviors so appalling the perpetrator doesn't deserve to be forgiven? The Amish say no. And so does the man whose son was shot delivering pizza. But we do need to be sensitive to cases where it feels, say, premature to forgive, or where it's just asking too much of the person who's been hurt. Take the daughter of a Boston policeman killed by a Vietnam protester who refused to forgive even 20 years later when the protester came out of hiding and went to prison. No, the policeman's daughter said, what you did is unforgivable. So there we have one individual's frank unwillingness to forgive, even after 2 decades. And at the other extreme, we have mass forgiveness on the part of the Amish. What do we do with this? I'd say that between these two extremes, we can build up our own forgiveness muscles and do it in small ways. Forgive someone who ran a red light and scared you to death. Forgive someone who let you down or said something to you that felt thoughtless. You've never done something like that? I have. But what if you want to forgive? And in all honesty, you just can't muster the forgiveness feeling. Or what if you're flat out unwilling, like that Boston policeman's daughter? I think what's important here is that to live up to the name, to the word forgiveness, it must be voluntary. And only you are qualified to make the decision to forgive. That's a paraphrase from someone who should know, who has every right to pronounce on the matter, an Austrian Holocaust survivor, Simon Wiesenthal. It implies another truth, that you have a right to your feelings, whatever they are, and others do not have the right to judge you for those feelings. This brings me to our own institutional trauma, which of course also traumatized individual people. How might we look at forgiveness in this particular situation. According to our covenant, several points are germane, so let me review them. First, we covenant to be courageous in naming anything that diminishes our community, but also considerate in doing that naming. We agreed to speak directly to those involved, not about them to other people. And finally, while we covenant to offer forgiveness and understanding, we expect that forgiveness and understanding in return. In short, respect applies to everyone's dignity and well-being, not just one person's. So courageous but considerate in naming a problem, speaking to the person, not about the person, and requiring understanding for ourselves, as well as offering understanding to others. Of course, in the purest sense of forgiveness, we would extend it regardless. Let's call that the Jesus model or the Amish model, loving our enemies, turning the other cheek. Unconditional forgiveness, whether the instigator is remorseful or not. Being human, however, we do set up conditions. And being that our institution is made up of humans, it asks that we abide by those covenantal conditions. With all of this in mind, I asked a handful of members for their thoughts. I've amended and paraphrased the answers they gave me. 4 different people I will paraphrase here. Number 1, the first person said, I recall Reverend Amy saying that by UU standards, even Hitler should have the possibility of redemption. But the person we're talking about doesn't seem to want that, at least at this point. His intention appears to be blame everyone else. To forgive him, I'd first ask that he request my forgiveness, sincerely and honestly. That's person number 1. Second person says, I've mostly forgiven him, but I still feel some resentment, so I guess I'm not quite there yet. I feel compassion for him, but then again, I wasn't directly attacked or personally harmed, and I can see who those who were might still be angry. But I do believe in redemption and that people can change, so I'm waiting to see if he's willing to do his part. The third person said this, yes, I could forgive him if he could admit to blaming all problems on others' racism and could admit to ignoring the hostile and negative impact of his own often public behavior and could admit to cutting off his wife from friends and the institution she helped create and grow. I am sad to say that she often supported him, even in silence. All right, so far these are pretty much all of a piece, aren't they? Here's the fourth with a little twist. Yes, I can forgive him. I do think everyone on each side needs to be made whole, but I separate forgiveness from the transgression. Otherwise, why forgive in the first place? It's the harm done that creates the need to forgive. Also, forgiveness must be given unconditionally, but each person involved needs to do that on his or her own. I'll speak for myself now. I must say, it's been very bizarre trying to reconcile the person I thought I knew with the person who went on the attack. He and I had a warm friendship, I thought, until in an email, he abruptly called it off for as long as I remained affiliated with this fellowship. This came at a time when I knew nothing about what was going on. completely out of the blue. I remember my mother used to say, it's better to be hurt than to hurt someone else. Because if it's the latter, if you hurt someone else, you have to live with regret. So while I can forgive this person for my own hurt feelings, it's much harder to forgive him for what I know he's caused other people to suffer. In the UU tradition, we speak of being in right relationship with each other. I just learned that's a term borrowed from the Quakers. The idea of right relationship is, of course, affirming the worth and dignity of every person. That does not include affirming destructive behavior, no matter the cause. Not when that behavior trespasses on the worth and dignity of other people. In this case, the board did as required to put all parties back into right relationship. But since the party who trespassed has yet to acknowledge it, much less say sorry, we know that institutionally speaking, right relationship between us has not been restored. Individually, of course, you and I are not institutions. And that's why I invite you to think, as the congregants I've already quoted have done, where do you stand on forgiveness in this case? Right here and right now. The fact that many of the parties involved are dear to us all gives us all the more reason to feel betrayed. Forgiving that might put our capacity for compassion to the real test. Yet I do think compassion is called for. Because if nothing else, those who harm others do pay a price. They pay a price of their own, as my mother knew. You and I in this church might be fewer in number today, but we're stronger for what we've been through and together. I don't think that's true of the people who hurt us. As hurt as we've been, it hurts me to think about what all this has cost those who hurt us. I also ask you to keep in mind a particular human tendency called fundamental attribution error. It's a big term for something we all do, we're all inclined to do. It goes like this. When I insult you, it's because I'm in a tough situation. But if you insult me, it's because you're homophobic or sexist or just a jerk. In other words, my misbehavior is just a fluke, but yours shows that you have a flawed character. Now apply that to the erroneous blame game of our recent upheaval. Do we blame what has happened on the whole unfortunate situation, or do we blame the mess on the character of the person who offended? I don't know. What I do know is that we're all guilty of attribution errors of this sort, especially in our emotional moments. Which is simply to say, let's be careful of feeling too damned righteous about how explosive moments like these have played out. Well, as you know, I'm a writer, and through my writer's lens, I can see that forgiveness plays a key part in this story of ours. It may even be the main theme. Trouble is, you and I are not omniscient authors. We're just characters in this story. And we have no control over how other characters think or feel or react. What if certain of them decide not to follow the right relationship outline. Now what? I have 3 suggestions. First, let's remember that forgiveness must be authentic. It can't be coerced. It only arrives when the giver, that's you, among others, when the giver is ready. The readiness is all, you may have heard me say in the past. You can't make yourself be hungry. You can't make yourself be in love. Either you are or you're not. You can't make yourself forgive. Second thing to consider are the words of that 4th member I quoted, whose strategy was to separate forgiveness from the transgression. Because after all, it's the harm done that creates the need to forgive in the first place. Why else would forgiveness even exist? And finally, contemplate the possibility that we might be best served by a calm wait and see. Despite and including the events of the past day or 2, our story is still ongoing. As one who's been wounded, one among those who have been wounded, give some serious thought to forgiving this person, but also keep living your life. See how your feelings evolve, and grant him or them the leeway to do the same. If I know nothing else, I know that things change. In my Odyssey sermon recently, I mentioned the wheel of fortune as a Ferris wheel. We ride it up and we ride it down. So let's hope and trust that we're on our way up, and let's keep our hearts open for whatever comes next.
The offering is a sacrament of the Free Church. It is supported by the generosity of all who join with us. There are several ways you can give. You can place your offering in the baskets by the exit door as you leave the sanctuary. You can mail checks to the office, drop them in our mailbox, or call the office to make other arrangements. We are also equipped to accept donations through the Venmo app. Payment through this app should be made to UUFCC offering. And you have to put that on or it doesn't go through. I found that out personally. If you would like your donation to apply to anything other than the operating fund, like our second helping, please indicate your intentions in the checks memo line. Our second helpings support Harry Chapin Food Bank and 2 local pantries, Chaps and Meals on Wheels. And your generosity is always, always appreciated. If you're with us for the first time, do not feel obligated to give. You're our guests. And now Jim will play a postlude, Sonata in D. It's an abbreviated version by Haydn. Jim, I must say that listening to live music, especially your playing, has just elevated my heart. And now it's time to highlight some of the special events and activities that occur here. It's called Life of the Community. I want to remind you, let's see, that the program council is scheduled to meet this coming Tuesday, the 27th at 11:30 a.m. And I understand that's Zoom. Is that correct? Yes. Happy hour with John will continue on Wednesday evenings. And again, that's a Zoom activity. The Buddhist meditation group will actually meet here in the sanctuary, and that's on Thursday. On the 31st, Reverend Kathy Schmidt is offering a workshop on writing a sermon. And you need to write to Reverend Kathy and put in your reservation. Her address is in the update. And I want to remind you that our office administrator, Mary Jane Williams, has had back surgery. I hear she's doing quite well, but she will not be in the office for another week. I know that she's home, so cards and maybe some texts would be very appropriate. After she gets back, if you have an old fob, you need to get it she does something to it and you get a new one. And that'll let you come into the building. But wait until she's back before that happens. And I think that that's all I have this morning. I'm not either. If you want to have an announcement read from the pulpit, again, use the Book of Life email. It's bookoflife@uufcc.org. Now, finally, following Jim's rendition of Go Now in Peace, the ushers will come and lead you out the exits. Now, once you're out on the patio, please feel free to greet one another. But remember, COVID-19 is still with us. So keep necessary precautions in mind. And if you are watching us via YouTube, after this service is over, you can socialize via Zoom using the Fellowship's universal link, which is printed in the weekly updates. And now Jim will play Go Now in Peace. Let's see, do we have an usher that's going to help us? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, we forgot to turn off the blow out the chalice.
Closing words?
Yes, but let's recite the chalice words. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of hope, the fire of commitment, or the warmth of community. May these ideals shine in our lives and warm our hearts until we're together again. And as a benediction, I would like to read these words from St. Francis of Assisi. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. For it is in giving that we receive, and in pardoning that we are pardoned. Now go in peace.